Does the decision to become an activist happen over time, or does it happen in an instant? For many of the changemakers we talk to on this podcast, there's not just one moment that drives us to become leaders and changemakers. It often happens over time as we learn more about the injustices of the world, and we recommit ourselves to the work of building a better and brighter future. But for some of us, our lives are split between the before and the after. Sometimes something happens that shatters our status quo, and it forces us to become the leaders that we need, whether we want it to or not. Welcome to Participation Trophy, the do-gooder's guide to changing the world, an unscientific podcast where we set out to discover if participation trophies drove a generation of greats. I'm your host, Topher Williams. On today's podcast, we're joined by a very special guest. He's a survivor, but he's also well-practiced at taking dark and turning it into light. He's an activist, an author, a public speaker, and currently serving as the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign. It's Brandon Wolfe. Thanks for coming on the pod, Brandon.
Thanks, Topher. Good to be here.
So, Brandon, let's just jump right into it. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you are doing to change the world?
Yeah, thank you. I really love the lead up, the question about, are we born into activism through these moments of trial and tribulation, or do we find ourselves there slowly but surely being radicalized by the injustices of the world around us? And I think the answer is probably a little bit of both for me. When I was growing up, I lived in rural Oregon in a town that certainly did not look a lot like me. People didn't love a lot like me. And for most of my young life, I just wanted somewhere to belong. I wanted to feel the sense of normal that my peers got to feel walking down the hallways or going home to eat dinner around the kitchen table. And it took me years to find a shred of that normal. I packed 2 suitcases when I was 19. I moved 3,000 miles away to sunny Orlando, Florida. I remember telling my dad that if there was anywhere I could be gay and brown, it had to be Walt Disney World. And it turns out I was right about that.
That sounds right. That sounds true.
It was true. And I started to find that sense of safety and belonging that I'd longed for as a kid. I found it in, foods I'd never tried before, in languages I'd never heard before, in people I'd never imagined possible before. I found it in physical spaces like bars and nightclubs, at work, in the break room. And I truly found it in chosen family. I met my best friend, Dru, in 2014, and he reframed the way that I think about the world, the way I think about my place in the world. And so from, early childhood until 2014, 2015, I'd been on this journey to find belonging. And when I stumbled into it, I didn't imagine that my job would be to fight for it. I thought my only job was to hold on to it, that I just live that sliver of normal and ride it off into retirement. And then in 2016, everything changed for me. In the summer of that year, I did the most normal thing. I went and got a drink with Dru and his partner, Juan, in one of the most normal places for us. Pulse Nightclub was a safe space for people like us. It's one of the first places I ever held hands with someone I had a crush on without looking over my shoulder first. It's one of the first places where I ever wore my skinniest pair of jeans without being afraid of what someone might call me. And everything about it that night was normal too, until it wasn't. A gunman charged through the front doors just after 2:00 in the morning and tore our normal apart. 49 people were stolen from us that night. And I was really, really lucky to, by happenstance, have been washing my hands at a bathroom sink when the shooting started and was able to escape through a fire exit. But so many people in our community were not that lucky. Lives were torn apart, families were shredded, and tragically, my best friend Dru and his partner Juan were among those who had their lives stolen. I share that because, I had lived this life. I'd lived decades experiencing the injustices of the world, wondering if people like me ever get a chance to feel normal. Part of that radicalized me into wanting to make the world a better place, but it was truly having my chosen family, my brothers, ripped away from me that helped me understand that it was not enough to simply ride normal off into retirement. It was not enough to feel comfortable and revel in that comfort. It was my job to go out and help other people get the chance to experience that sense of safety and belonging. And so I got involved in any way I could think. I volunteered with campaigns. I started working alongside queer civil rights organizations. And the more I got into the movement, I tell people it's kind of like the Matrix. Politics is like the Matrix. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so much of my work was now seeing the impact that politics has on people's everyday lives. And so the more I got involved, the more I wanted to be a part of making a change. And I'm so honored that now I live in Washington, D.C., and I get to help make sure that anytime LGBTQ plus lives are being debated, that our stories are front and center.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing your story. I think for me as a queer person, I think for probably all queer people out there, right? We all remember that day and we know where we were, and it had an impact on everyone, no matter who you were, because it was such a violation of our community. And it's really powerful to hear your story shared with us, and to be able to really put faces behind the names and numbers. I think we're often in this country really used to seeing headlines about gun violence, but being able to understand the stories and the faces and the people behind it, I think is how we really start to make change, right? I mean, the Pulse Nightclub terrorist attack happened almost exactly 9 years ago to the day, on June 12th, 2016. And I'm wondering, as you reflect on almost a decade since the tragedy, are there moments or victories that stand out as giving you hope for the future?
Yeah, there are so many moments where I think we have made immense progress. Some of them have been very public, right? I think about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that Joe Biden signed into law, the first, major gun safety legislation in this country in decades. Similarly, in Florida, being a part of passing the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School Safety Act after the tragic shooting in Parkland. That was the first, major gun safety legislation in Florida in over 20 years. Those have been really big moments. I also think about the 2018 midterms where, the Pulse community was a part of helping to shift the tide. And that year, for perhaps the first time, more candidates backed by Moms Demand Action won their races for Congress than candidates backed by the NRA. It was a huge sea shift in the way people are thinking about gun safety. It became clear that the issue was generational, not partisan. And we were beginning to make real progress. I would have to say, though, that those big public moments of victory feel good, but the ones that have been the most fulfilling for me are perhaps the more quiet, the more behind closed doors. In the wake of the tragedy, we launched an organization called the Dru Project, a few of us who were really close with Dru. And I remember sitting around his kitchen island not that long after the shooting, drinking half-empty bottles of wine that he'd left behind and talking about what it would be like to create a legacy for him. And for us, the answer was really obvious. We would do the work that he would be doing if he was still here. One of the things he was most proud of was when he was in high school in rural Florida, he started his school's first Gay Straight Alliance student club. And he knew that it was dangerous to do that. He wasn't sure what the response would be, but he also understood that school deserved a place where people could be safe, where they could feel seen, where they could understand how valued they were. And so we knew that if we were going to do justice to Dru and his legacy, that we would do that same work. So again, we launched the Dru Project that year, and the most fulfilling work I think I've done over the last 9 years has been with the Dru Project. To date, we've given over $250,000 away in college funding to young people who are already changing the world, queer young people they're just remarkable. The work they're doing at such a young age is remarkable. We wanted to give them access to higher education to go and chase their dreams. We've given, thousands of dollars away as grants to those Gay Straight Alliance student clubs and schools all across the country. We've authored the country's most comprehensive guidebook to make sure their time together feels valuable. That is the work that has made me the most fulfilled. And it's also filled me with the most hope, because I see these young people at 15, 16, 17 years old, and they're not yet tainted by the despair of the world. They haven't had their dreams shaved down yet. They haven't been told to tamp down their imaginations. And so they dream big about what's possible in the world. You hear them talking about the future, and it fills you with hope because you know that better is coming. So that has to be the most fulfilling body of work that I've done over the last 9 years.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. What do you want people to remember about your friends Dru and Juan?
It's always been important to me in the wake of the tragedy that I'm able to share who they were as they lived and not just as they were stolen from us. I want people to remember that Dru and Juan were full of love, full of light, that they laughed, that they went out for a drink, that they stayed in and watched movies. I want them to remember that they were human beings, that they were young people who had a future that was stolen from them. And I want people to remember that because that's true of those who've been stolen from us by gun violence every single day in this country. Every time you hear about a shooting, whether it's a mass shooting at a school or, a moment of gun violence in a local community, the person that's been stolen from us was a human being who had a future taken from them. They have family members who now have empty seats at their kitchen dinner tables, who have missing faces at birthday parties. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the tragedy that is gun violence in this country. Instead, we have to remind ourselves that these are human beings and that their lives were worth defending and that the lives of the people around us are worth defending today.
Yeah. Okay. Snaps for that. Right. I mean, thank you. It's really incredible to hear you talk about your friends and be able to hear their legacy and their joy continuing to live on through the way that you can share their story through the organization that you founded. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
It seems to me and probably probably everybody in America that every day the news is really bad and the world is really dark, right? But I often tell people I'm an activist and I do this work because I'm an optimist, right? I think you can't be an activist if you don't have some level of optimism that the world can be a better place. So I'm curious if you can share with us what is driving you to continue to do this work, even when things get really tough.
Yeah, I'll give you two answers to that question. Yeah. The first is I never lose sight of our ancestors and the struggles they went through to get us to today, right? I was talking to somebody over the weekend. I was up in Rochester spending some time with volunteer leaders and just understanding how they're processing everything, the things that are resonating with them. And the takeaway I got from this person was that, the hope of the LGBTQ plus community in particular is not naive. It's paid for. We paid for this hope by, fighting through the darkest of times, right? The HIV and AIDS epidemic, the riots after the Stonewall bar was raided, these really intense, even Pulse Nightclub, right? These really intense moments of despair. And yet we found ways to push through and change the world in the wake of them. That's how we paid for the hope we have today. And so I'm reminded that, even though things are dark, things are very challenging right now. We have, an administration with Donald Trump and JD Vance and Elon Musk. And, there are enablers in Congress that are trying to build political careers on the backs of marginalized people, especially queer people. Although that is true, our ancestors also fought through hell. And in the depths of those moments, they did not know if they would live to see the fruits of their advocacy. The people who were fighting during the height of the HIV and AIDS crisis did not know that they would live to see, the day where we have PrEP that prevents people from contracting HIV in the first place, right? The people at the depths of the marriage equality movement, when state by state Republicans were passing bans on marriage equality through states, constitutions, they did not know if they would live to see a day where marriage equality was the law of the land. But those ancestors kept fighting for it because they knew the fight was worth it, right? They had hope and optimism that what was just on the other side of those obstacles was worth fighting for. And we're here today because of it, right? Because of the fight of the ACT UP movement, we're in a place where, we have PrEP available in a lot of places free of charge, right? Subsidized by the federal government, a federal government that would not recognize our lives at that time, right? Because of the courage of people in 2003, 2004 fighting to make sure that their love was recognized like anybody else's. Not only did we get Obergefell, the ruling that made marriage equality the law of the land, then in 2022, we went on to pass the Respect for Marriage Act that made sure those marriages were respected federally in statute. So that's one thing, is I hold on to the strength and courage that our ancestors showed, even in the darkest of moments. And if they could do it, I know I can and have to do it in this time too. And the second is a bit more personal. This a few days after the tragedy at Pulse, we had a funeral service for Dru. And I made him a promise that day that shaped the rest of my life, the 9 years that have come and the years that will come beyond now. I promised him that I would never stop fighting for a world that he would be proud of. And I knew that was going to require me to fight hard, even when the obstacles felt insurmountable, even when the hurdles felt highest. We're in one of those moments, but I made a commitment and I'm going to make good on it. I will never stop fighting for a world, not just that he would be proud of, but a world that all of us can be proud of.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think especially that first part you were saying about people who are trying to build a career off of oppressing people, especially LGBTQ people, is really important. We need to remember that. But I like to remind myself that the reality is that these folks, JD Vance, other politicians, leaders of this far right movement, they know that you can't eliminate queer people from existence, right? They know that. So what they're trying to do is try to make sure that that queer people don't have joy, that we can't show our lives with happiness and with joy. And that is really fundamentally what they're trying to eliminate from our society. You just can't actually get rid of all queer people, right? We come from every walk of life, every background, every border, right? But what they are trying to eliminate is our source of joy. And that is what makes us really resilient. So I really appreciate that. And I think, speaking of resilience, in 2023, you published your memoir, A Place for Us, which focuses on resilience in the face of adversity. And so I'm curious, what's the most important thing that our listeners need to know about remaining resilient in 2025?
I think there are a couple of things that I walked away from the book writing experience with that felt profound to me. So much of that journey was about me learning more about myself and my own journey and how I wanted to articulate it. But one of the biggest takeaways I had was that you don't have to save the world on your own in order to earn a place in it. And I think so many marginalized people carry this sense that they have to solve the world's problems to prove that they belong in it, right? They want to carry every crisis that the world is facing. They hold all of the trauma and the pain of the things that are going on in the world, and it creates a sense of overwhelm. It beats you down, it burns you out, and eventually you want to unplug because you can't even figure out where to start. But the truth is that saving the world, making the world a better place, it was never an individual activity. It was always a team sport. And that requires, one, trusting each other to do the work together. I care deeply about all of the issues that we're facing, but I know I'm a subject matter expert on a couple of them. And that's where I'm going to focus my energy. And I'm going to trust that my colleagues, my partners on these other issues are going to keep me informed and tell me how I can plug in on those, on those other issues that I care about. And two, it also requires us to have the humility to ask for the help we need, the support we need. I really had a hard time after the tragedy at Pulse asking people for support. People would always say, "Are you taking care of yourself? I hope you're practicing self-care." And I would, nod and smile like I kind of knew what they were talking about. But all it did was stress me out. Now I'm like, oh my God, I got to put time on my calendar to take care of myself. And so one day with a colleague, he said, I just want to make sure you're finding time to take care of yourself. And I responded and I said, is that you offering to take something off my plate so I have space to care for myself?
Oh.
And it was unexpected. I think he was a little shocked, maybe a little offended that I asked. But it changed our relationship. From then forward, he did not ask me if I was taking care of myself without offering to take something off my plate as well. And I think, resilience requires us to have the humility to be able to say, I need to put something down. I need to choose rest in this moment, because rest is an act of resilience in a world that tells you you're only as valuable as what you can produce. So I guess my two key takeaways are, one, you don't have to save the world on your own to earn a place in it. And number two, you got to ask for the help you need. You have to trust other people to be there for you the same as you would be there for them.
Yes, you don't have to save the world on your own. That is something that I think all of us need to really hold tight. I think many people, what prevents them from leaning in and into their activism or really getting out there to try and make a difference is they say, well, I can't stop Congress from doing this, or I can't, change this one thing. Well, there are all of us have things that we can influence, we can change, we can do. And if we all focus on what, as you said, the areas that we are experts in, that is, when we all do that collectively, that is what really moves the needle. So I really appreciate that. And that's how I started in my activist journey, right? I started focusing on what I could do in my local community. And then that led one thing to another, one to another, one to another. And now I feel like I'm able to have a lot, I could have never imagined the kind of impact or change making that I can do today that I couldn't have done when I first started on this journey, right? So
the most important moments of community organizing we do are around dinner tables. They're in group chats. They're, with the book club. Mm-hmm. Those one-to-one, person-to-person, human-to-human conversations that we have that shift people's perception of what's possible, that change their perspective about the world. That is the most important community organizing we do. And I think it goes unheralded. I think it goes uncelebrated. And I would encourage people, again, it's not about the big stage or the bright lights. It's about having honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but real conversations with the people in your life that, that's where you make the greatest change.
So as an author, I need some advice. I want to know what the best book that you've ever read is and why, and why.
So I read How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones, probably maybe like 6 months to a year before I started writing my own book. And it was so profound. You can find Saeed on social media. He's at The Ferocity on all platforms. I think he also has a podcast that folks can listen to. But Saeed's book was profound for me because I think it was the first time I felt seen in the pages of a book.
Thank you. Well, I am excited for the book recommendation, and I will definitely be reading it. And I hope that everyone listening also cracks it open in addition to your book, right? Let's not leave that.
Please. Thank you.
Okay, Brandon, I want us to have a little bit of fun. So I'm going to ask you some rapid fire this or that questions about queer culture. Okay, ready? Rapid fire. Madonna or Lady Gaga?
Lady Gaga.
Drag Race or Pose?
Pose.
Pride Parade or Pride Brunch?
Protest.
Protest. Ooh, love it. Okay, glitter or leather?
Glitter.
Lesbian TikTok or gay Twitter?
Oh, God. Lesbian TikTok.
I agree with that, to be honest with you. Death Drop or Duck Walk?
Death Drop. Although I might break a hip if I tried.
Yeah, I won't be doing one either. Finally, Campy Queen or Fashion Queen?
I think Fashion Queen. So I'm sorry. I have to give you the caveat that my Pulse coming of age experience was Roxy Andrews. And so I feel like for me, drag is personified in Roxy Andrews's big hair, fashion outfits. So I think I'm going Fashion Queen.
All right. So where can folks find you online to follow and connect?
I am on all platforms. I unfortunately don't have a consistent handle, but you can just search Brandon Wolf. I use Instagram most often, Brandon J. Wolf. I'm horrible at TikTok, but I'm also there. But yeah, find me. Let's connect. I'd love to keep the conversation going and chat about how you can change the world from your little corner of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, Brandon. It's really been a true pleasure to have you with us, share your story and your hopes for the future, as well as some lessons about how we can make the world a better place.
Anytime.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Participation Trophy. I'm your host, Topher Williams. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Participation Trophy Podcast, and follow me on Instagram at @TophMcGof so you don't miss one single thing. Until next time, remember, it's up to us to make the world that we want to see. Bye.